This time we will talk about an American illustrator and comic book artist best known for his works related to science fiction and fantasy. Coming from the independent world, he acquired cult author status in the late 70s. His comics featured in Heavy Metal magazine, especially the Dance series, which was featured in the magazine's first film adaptation in 1981. Richard Corben was born in October 1, 1940, on a farm in Anderson, Missouri, and grew up in Sunflower, Kansas, a community that worked for the Sunflower Ordnance Works, an army plant that manufactured bombs in World War II. Corben drew comics all of his life. An early effort was a series of comics about the adventures of Trail, the family dog. Later, he created imitations of Tarzan and Brother of the Spear. He also showed a keen interest in animation by turning many pads of paper into animated flip books. He attended the Kansas City Art Institute, where he concentrated on basic drawing and painting, developing skills that would become vital in creating his chosen realistic style. At that time, his college offered no courses for animation, but by using his father's 8mm movie camera, Corben nevertheless produced a 5-minute animated film highlighting the labors of Heracles as his senior project. After graduation, Corben wanted to go to New York to launch a career in comics or animation, but he was shy and timid and put off such a drastic move after working in construction for his father for a while. He found a local job as an artist, animator, and cameraman in a Kansas City industrial film company during this time, despite his shyness, and found a girl to marry him. While working as a professional animator at Kansas City's Corben Productions, he created one of his works that eventually became one of the most famous, Dan. Corben created Dan as a protagonist of a short film titled Neverwhere. The film is animated with framing sequences filmed in live action. After working as a professional animator, Corben started writing and illustrating for underground comics. His first work was published in 1968 in the fanzine Voice of Comicdom. 2 years later, Corben published his own underground comic book entitled Fantagor, which consisted of 4 science fiction tales that he had conceived and drawn himself. They contained elements of horror, violence, and sexuality, and already embodied the main themes of his future work. Afterwards, he worked on the underground magazines Slow Death and Skull, sometimes using the pseudonym Gore. In 1970, he began illustrating horror and science fiction stories for Warren Publishing. His stories appeared in Creepy, Eerie, 1984, and Comics International. He also colored several episodes of Will Eisner's Spirit. In 1971, Corben's first longer fantasy story, Rolf, came out, which still was printed in black and white. The story was about the loyalty of a dog to his mistress. Through a magic spell gone wrong, Rolf becomes half dog, half man, and as this hybrid creature, he must rescue his mistress from demons in a strange land. In 1975, a selection of his black and white underground comics stories was collected in hardcover as the Richard Corben Funny Book from Kansas City's Nickelodeon Press. A year later, he adapted a short Robert E. Howard story in an early graphic novel, Blood Star. Also, in 1975, when Mobius, Philippe Druillet, and Jean-Pierre started publishing the magazine Metal Heartland in France, Corben submitted some of his stories to them. He continued his work for the franchise in America, where the magazine was called Heavy Metal. Among the stories drawn for Heavy Metal, he continued the saga of his most famous creation, Dan, which had begun in the short film Neverwhere and a short story in the underground publication Green Wheat No. 2. The Saga of Dan is a fantasy series about the adventures of a young underweight nerd who travels to Neverwhere. The hero finds himself transformed into a muscular giant of a man in prehistoric universe of dragons, animal men, and beautiful savage women. This universe takes inspirational notes from Robert E. Howard's Hyborian Age, Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom, and H.P. Lovecraft's Horror Dimensions. This story was adapted in a highly abridged form, co-produced by Corben himself in the animated film Heavy Metal, where Dan was voiced by John Candy in a humorous interpretation of the character that Corben found excellent. Corben founded in 1986 his own publishing imprint, Fatagor Press. Among the titles Fatagor published were Dan Saga, Horror in the Dark, Rip in Time, and Song of Mutant World. Corben draws for Marvel, DC, Dark Horse Comics, and other publishing houses in many franchises. Most of them are cover work, but also interior art on series like Ghost Rider and Hellboy. He collaborated with Brian Azzarello on 5 issues on Hellblazer, which was collected in a trade called Hellblazer Hard Time. At Marvel's Max imprint, he has produced Hound of Horror, a mini-series adapting classic works of horror to comics. The first mini-series, published in 2006, was based on the stories of Edgar Allan Poe, followed by a second series in 2008 adapting works by H.P. Lovecraft. Also, he worked with Rob Zombie and Steve Niles on the independent comic Bigfoot for IDW Publishing. Apart from the comics, Corben's art appeared in the covers of Meat Loaf, Bat Out of Hell, Jim Steinman, Bat for Good, and a movie poster for the Brian De Palma film Phantom of the Paradise. In addition, he provided cover art for the VHS release of the low-budget horror film Spookies. In May 2020, Parallax Studio announced pre-production on the live-action animated film Meat, based on the comic book Fever Dreams, illustrated by Corben and writing by Jan Sternat. Meat premiered at the 2022 Cannes Film Festival and was released for streaming. Corben's work in comics and animation has won him recognition, including President of the Japan Culture Society Trophy, Spectrum Grandmaster Award in 2009, Will Eisner Award Hall of Fame in 2012, and Angoulême Grand Prix. Richard Corben died on December 2, 2020. He was not just another example of that type of comic that went far beyond the juvenile comic. His work was something else, something that stood out among a group of extraordinary adult comic works. Richard Corben was much more than a master of comics. From his hands emerged some images that simply nobody was able to match, and that amazed a whole generation of readers who made the transition to adulthood throughout the 80s.